Avast, ye hearties! There be heavy spoilers ahead.
Drunkman tells no good tales.
I've been playing Naughty Dog games for over 30 years. From Rings of Power on Genesis to Way of the Warrior on 3DO to Crash, Jak and Daxter, and the Uncharted series. And aside from the clunkiness of those first two early titles, I've never had a whole lot to complain about, plot points from Uncharted 3 stolen from The Last Crusade notwithstanding. And then I got my hands on The Last of Us. I didn't hate it, but I didn't like it that much either, for the most part. I got burned out on zombie games, zombie movies, and zombie TV shows a long time ago, folks. And you can scream about they're not zombies, they're infected all you want. A zombie by any other name is still a monster that used to be a human who wants to kill and or eat you, okay? I hated how it borrowed mechanics from Uncharted, but made them intentionally more cumbersome and less accurate to heighten the tension and realism, despite the fact that if such controls were released in an Uncharted-style action title, you'd all be demanding that the game be burned at the stake. The story, as it was, had already been done in bits and pieces in previous better works. The only thing that kept me remotely interested in it was the characterization and relationship between the two main characters, Ellie and Joel. I was begrudgingly willing to put up with the mediocrity of the gameplay to see the next Ellie and Joel scene, which were all brilliantly performed by their respective actors. Ellie and Joel were the soul of The Last of Us. They justified its otherwise derivative existence. The Last of Us had a dark ending that provided no firm resolution to the story, which was a popular thing in horror films of that era, The Mist from 6 years earlier being a good example of this. It was fine the way it was. If nothing else, it at least encouraged discussion. It didn't need a sequel. Sometimes ambiguous endings are a good thing. But in 2016, a sequel was announced nonetheless, and now 4 years later, here we are, and I have endured the unfortunate consequences of that decision. Alright, we have a lot of ground to cover, so let's just get this over with. Let's start with the graphics, since I want to save the worst of this mess for last. There is no arguing the fact that The Last of Us Part 2 is currently the best-looking console game ever released. True, there's no 60 frames per second mode available on the PS4 Pro. We'll see how it looks on PS5. But since it wants so hard to resemble a movie, I don't have a problem with the 30 frames per second. The textures are highly detailed, the environments are equally detailed, well laid out, with a good mix of both grime and color, much like the first, and that facial motion capture animation is just the best I've ever seen, having less of the uncanny valley effect than any other game I've played on any system. In fact, when it comes to graphics design, I have just one single complaint. The jumping animation is a complete joke. What happened here? Just a few weeks ago, they were bragging in trailers about being able to jump, and that's fine. It adds another layer to the platforming aspect of the game, but that's mechanics. The act of jumping needs to look good too, and for whatever reason, they seriously dropped the ball here. I just don't get it. Since so many of the game's canned, repeatable animations seem just like minor variations on animations lifted straight from the Uncharted series, and its jumping sequences has never looked as piss poor as this. Every time you jump, you look like you're skipping through the cotton candy bunny forest on Easter Sunday, and it cracks me up every time I see it. I experienced a handful of glitches throughout the game, but not in a repeatable fashion. They occurred seemingly at random. Ellie's arm would get stuck out to the side in an awkward position, textures would fail to load on cliff sides, textures would fail to load in cutscenes, the horse's tail would start going nuts like its ass was being assaulted by a platoon of flies, and on one occasion, I experienced the dreaded fall to infinity glitch. I was wandering around on horseback in the open world area of downtown looking for loot, and I walked up alongside a wall, and suddenly, horse and all, I fell through the ground and began drifting down into infinity, the undefined bottom of the map looming over me. I've seen this numerous times in games from Ubisoft. Remember my review of The Division, BioWare, and various other studios, but this was the first time I'd ever seen it happen in a Naughty Dog game. I was rather taken aback by it, and after rebooting, I went back to that spot and tried to repeat the glitch so I could get it captured, but it never reoccurred. The music in the game is much like the first. I'm a sucker for good acoustic guitar, and while you don't get all that much here, it shines when you do. The music is used more this time around. In the original game, you often had no music at all during pitched battles, but here you experience music during fight scenes on a much greater basis. But the music you get is kind of generic Blumhouse-era horror movie noise, heavy on string instruments to instill the typical horror dread vibe. It's perfectly serviceable, but it's also utterly forgettable. Aside from the guitar pieces, some of which are covers of pre-existing songs, there's little music in the game that you'll remember or catch yourself humming or whistling later. The sound effects and voice acting are, I'm afraid, a mixed bag. The 3D audio works tremendously. The gunshots sound great, the explosions sound good and have real oomph to them, the birds tweeting in the distance, the crashing of ocean waves, the roaring rivers, all of that is absolutely exemplary. And the voice acting from the primary actors is also absolutely top-notch. It's the secondary extra acting that really shits the bed. First, you have the human enemies. This game has an underlying theme about the futility of violence for the sake of revenge, but it also is basically a running commentary from Naughty Dog about we, the gamers, and how terrible we are about enjoying simulated violence. The game is full of both subtle and brick-to-the-head elements of emotional manipulation meant to inspire self-loathing. They want you to feel guilty about the acts that you're committing. So when you kill a random human entity, one of their comrades will scream, "Archibald is dead!" or "Lucille, no!" The thing is, by the time you get far enough into the game to notice that this is going on, you've already got a small river of blood on your hands. Plus, I'd wager that most of you watching this have killed a city's worth of enemies in video games already. So instead of it making me reevaluate my principles about the killing of my fellow video game man, instead it caused me to think of the "oh my god" guy from Troll 2 every time it happened. Same thing with the death sounds the humans make when they die. They're again going for revulsion through realism here. They want you to feel uncomfortable and guilty about all the killing that you're doing. So you sneak up behind a guy and slit his throat. What happens next, on almost every occasion, regardless of the gender of your prey, sounds less like an actual human in their blood-curdling death throes, and more like Stitch, Experiment 626, pleasuring himself to climax. Once more, what was supposed to disturb me and cause deep introspection instead made me burst out in raucous, sustained laughter. It's just so over the top, almost like the sound effects of one of Peter Jackson's early films, the zombie horror comedy Dead Alive being a great example. I just couldn't take it seriously. Simultaneously, you have the sound effects of the infected. Not the clickers, those are okay. I mean the infected. Every single infected in the game sounds like someone who is constantly sitting on the toilet, struggling through the most difficult shit of their life. Again, me and Eighth just sat there laughing at it. How could we not? And here's one more perfect example of this, and a perfect example of the manipulation that's going on in this game to elicit guilt. At one point, you get the slip on a WLF member who's just sitting there alone playing her PlayStation Vita. You're forced to kill her in a QuickTime event. You have no choice not to. It just makes you do it. And then you hear in the background the others talking about her. She's a non-violent person. She doesn't really desire to kill people. Just like you. She just wants to sit and play her video games and have fun. Just like you. Now, don't you feel guilty for pressing square when the game forced you to and killing a fellow gamer? How dare you? It goes without saying that 8th and I had a nice long laugh at this particular bit of emotional manipulation and gaslighting. Gameplay-wise, it plays mostly like the first, and by that I mean the platforming of Uncharted, a heavily gimped version of the gunplay of Uncharted, a simplified version of the melee combat of Uncharted, the survival horror and limited resource management of Resident Evil, and a severely dumbed-down version of the stealth gameplay of Metal Gear Solid. In short, while everything at its core is functional, the fact that they're trying to be 3 different genres at once results in the series not standing out in any particular category, a jack of all trades and master of none, giving the gameplay overall a been there, done that quality. They've added 5 new mechanics to the gameplay here, and released trailers prior to the game coming out showing these mechanics off like they were somehow new innovations instead of things you've already done in Uncharted and other games 100 times before. You can, as mentioned earlier, jump now. You can swing from ropes. You can dodge during melee combat. You can lie prone to increase your stealthiness. And you can, on very limited occasions, swim, including having limited breath underwater, just like Sonic the Hedgehog from 30 years ago. First, let's look at the melee combat. It's essentially a dumbed-down, modified version of the melee from Uncharted 4, and boils down to what is really just a rhythm minigame. When an enemy comes at you and rears back to swing, you hit the dodge button and slide right out of their way. You get a couple of hits in, then back away and let the enemy come at you again, and repeat. On occasion, an enemy may grab you and you spam the square button, which also happens to be your attack button. So melee essentially boils down to hit L1, square, 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 back off, repeat. If you get grabbed, square, 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 start the pattern over. It feels almost like Bloodborne for toddlers. Boss fight enemies can have multiple follow-up strikes, but they mostly stick to the same pattern regardless of difficulty, so you basically know everything they're going to come at you with once you've seen them attack once or twice. The only exceptions to this are the blob monster during the second half of the game that looks like something that belongs more in Resident Evil than The Last of Us, which is just running around the room in circles and shooting and or bombing it until it's dead, and the 2 fights between Ellie and another character that I'll get into in a minute. The gun combat from the first game makes a reappearance, but with some new weapons available to play with and new upgrades for said weapons. Gunplay is probably the least satisfying aspect of the combat due to the gun sway mechanic, which is supposed to make it more realistic, despite the fact that keeping your gun steady is one of the first things you're taught when learning how to shoot and how to quickly target from one point to another with as little motion as necessary. And the slow as hell reloading makes a return, again, for realism, yet this is a game where you can take a bullet to the stomach and heal it by wrapping a bandage around your arm, so I don't really want to hear any comments about any jokes concerning the realism of this title, okay? Now that factors into the skill trees and weapon upgrading systems, as there are things you can unlock that lessen the gun sway, the recoil, increase the reload speed, and so on. These are earned by collecting scrap to upgrade your guns and supplement pills to unlock additional skills just like in the previous game. There are new skill trees and weapon mod options that have been added here, but even on higher difficulties they don't really seem to amount to much unless you're a completion nut or a trophy hunter, because none of the melee weapons or firearms represent the best weaponry in the game. The 2 best weapons in The Last of Us Part 2 are bricks and bottles. In the vast majority of encounters, including on harder difficulties, you can avoid combat altogether by just throwing a bottle or brick. I spent more time looking for extra bottles and bricks than I did ammo in my playthrough because of how easy it was. You see, the AI is super smart once it knows where you are. They'll flank you, send one enemy to lure you out, team up on you, and so on. But if they don't know where you are, they're complete idiots, including the Seraphites and their little whistle communication they use to track you and each other. If they don't know where you are, and you toss a bottle in the opposite direction of where you want to go, they'll have a "what the deuce" moment and rush to the source of the sound, allowing you to just mosey on past them to the exit, stealth killing any stragglers who happen to be in your way. This is actually where I derived a small modicum of fun from the game. Not from setting traps, laying bombs, and then throwing a bottle in that direction. Nah, nothing that needlessly complicated. Whenever I went into an area swarming with human enemies, I'd instantly look for two things: a bottle and infected or clickers. Sometimes they'd be roaming in circles in a corner of the map, somewhat distanced from the humans. Sometimes they'd be behind a door. I'd find where they were, and from a safe, concealed spot, toss a bottle at the human enemies, and then just sit back and enjoy the show as the two groups slaughtered each other. Then I'd just happily skip to the exit, or sneak up behind stragglers, stab them in the neck, collect whatever loot was to be found, and then leave. I made it through most of the game using bottles and bricks, which of course made the weapon upgrades and skill upgrades mostly useless. Oh, and pro tip, with the exception of one boss fight later in the game, if you happen across a room lit completely in red, find yourself a brick, cause there's gonna be infected, clickers, and humans in there, and all you gotta do is set up a brick-infused meet and greet, and then crouch walk your way to the exit and leave them to it.
Hey, Lost and Hungry, this is Soulless Misery. Come on back now. Yeah, I just thought I'd warn you about this tattooed teenage girl killing everybody all over town. Oh, me? I only escaped because I was busy walking the dog and staring off into the abyss while she was looking at magazines. Anyway, just thought I'd warn you. If you hear a bottle break, don't go investigate it. Go look behind the nearest abandoned checkout counter instead. Preferably with a flamethrower. Yeah, you too. Don't forget to ask your wife how our kids are doing.
One more side note. The first half of the game has this nice open world map where you can explore, find loot, experiment with different abilities if you so choose. This is where I learned the bottle infected trick, and so on. But when you get to the second half, the gameplay style changes back to the tighter, linear style of the first game, including scripted action sequences in the back of a truck and on horseback, which reminded me not only of Uncharted 4 with its big open area in the middle portion of the game, but also Grand Pulse in Final Fantasy XIII, where you spend hours going in straight lines, finally getting to a big open map, only to find out it's all just a bunch of optional bounty bosses and standard enemy grinding before you go right back to more walking in a straight line. There's far more to do in the downtown area of Seattle than in Grand Pulse, of course, which is why I would have preferred if the whole game was in more of an open map like downtown Seattle, but oh well. The Druckmann giveth, and the Druckmann taketh away. Oh, and before I forget, because they are highly forgettable, there are some extremely dumbed down area traversal puzzles, which are all variations on, I better move this dumpster, then step up on it to get to a higher spot, or I have to get this rope from here over to there so I can get to over yonder type stuff. All of it can be figured out by just looking up, down, left, and right for a couple of seconds. There's no brain teasers here. You'll have more challenge just figuring out where the exit is while roaming around in the dark, confined spaces, which brings me to the last topic under gameplay and controls. Naughty Dog has done one real positive here, and that's accessibility options. This is truly groundbreaking stuff. I'm going to give them that much. This game is far more accessible than any other game ever made outside of modding. You can tailor the gameplay to cater to any special need you might have. You can make the game about as easy or as hard as you like, regardless of what difficulty setting you chose as well. You can eliminate gun sway completely, you can turn on auto-aim, you can make enemies dumber so they notice less, you can make yourself completely invisible when lying prone, you can make yourself take less damage, your enemies inflict less damage, and so on. There are modes for folks who are blind, folks with hearing problems, and one other mode, the only one I actually used, where the game takes on almost a photo negative look, where detail is eliminated, but everything is super brightly lit, with you in blue, your enemies in red, and anything you can interact with, including ammo, collectibles, and exit doors, in yellow. Now, I'm not embarrassed at all to say that I did indeed use this mode a couple of times during the game. As you all know, I suffer from severe light sensitivity and migraines because of it, so I have to wear dark lens glasses every waking moment of every day, and that includes when playing video games. That mode made it much easier on me in the darker areas of the game, which otherwise would have been almost completely pitch black for me without turning the game's brightness all the way up. I actually appreciated this feature being there, so they get back a fourth of a point to gameplay for its inclusion. And of course, all of this also means that because using these features doesn't disable the trophies at all, those of you who aren't differently abled in any way but are instead just not any good at video games can easily earn a platinum that isn't "My name is Mayo." The only time I had anything equating to fun was using bricks to send infected to kill humans. Everything else is mostly picking up stuff, sneaking around enemies, occasionally stealth killing one with a slit throat or broken neck to stave off boredom. It's a highly repetitious gameplay loop, which you wouldn't think would be the case considering it's a mishmash of 3 different genres, but I got bored really quick and just started experimenting with how many scenes I could just run through without hiding, sneaking, or fighting anyone, which is indeed possible in more than one area. See, that's another thing about the enemy AI. They won't follow you through doors, over plank bridges, or across jumps. They stay in their predetermined areas, so if you can get to a trigger point that starts the next section of the level, like a door or a crawl space, you're mostly in the clear, unless it's one of those hold down triangle to open the door sequences that aren't scripted. Most of them you'll get through the door just before the bad guys arrive in a pre-scripted moment that's supposed to scare you to death but never does. But in others, like in one particular area full of these enemies called stalkers that like to hide and run from you, if you can make it to the door without them seeing you, the minute you try to open it, those stalkers will swarm on you, so you're better off just killing them all one by one before trying to open the door, which is more time consuming than hard as they take more hits than the average enemy. But I digress. The point is, the game inherently is mostly not fun, and in fact goes out of its way to discourage you from enjoying it. But I'll get to that in a minute. There's no multiplayer mode. We know from leaked footage that they were working on it at one point. Possibly they realized that if they spent this whole game trying to make you feel guilty for killing enemies, only to throw on a multiplayer mode where you earned match points for killing each other, it might just possibly come across as a teensy bit hypocritical. Who knows? Or maybe they're oblivious to that and will eventually add it as a free DLC a la Red Dead. All I know is that it's not there now. There are multiple difficulties in a new Game Plus mode where you keep all your upgrades and collectibles from the previous playthrough. So if you're a trophy hunter, I guess that's enough to keep you coming back. But for most who would buy and play this, they're going to play it once, experience the story, such as it is, and then never play it again. There's just not much of a reason to, once you've seen everything that happens. Which lastly brings me to the plot, the worst part of the experience. First off, we should get this out of the way for those who love to extol about the originality of the plot of these two games. Where else have we seen a man leading a woman who carries the hope of humanity through a post-apocalyptic wasteland? You've seen it at least twice. That's right. Where else have we seen huge cities grown over with vegetation as the Earth reclaims the land after a catastrophe, and also includes a guardian protecting a woman through said landscapes? That's right. Where have we seen a father and child travel across a destroyed Earth trying to find hope in a hopeless world? That's right. Where else have we seen a revenge story that plays out amidst a collapsed society? That's right. Where else have we seen those overgrown cities with a hero who learns that to his enemies, he is the villain? That's right. And finally, where have we seen zombie apocalypse stories where the zombies are really just a backdrop to help drive the drama between the characters and imply that humans are the real monsters? That's right. I could do this forever, but why bother? As I said before, the driving force and essential glue that tied the original game together and made it just moderately more than a cobbled together derivative also ran was the relationship between Ellie and Joel. Sure, this was also taken part and parcel from previous works, but it was done extremely well, with decent writing and excellent acting. Millions of fans out there came to genuinely care about those characters. I was not one of them, but I did consider their dynamic the best part of the original. Well, surprise, you just got Ryan Johnsoned by the almighty Druckmann, cause you're getting little to none of that here aside from some flashbacks. They're subverting your expectations. This is The Last Jedi of Us, Part 2. The Last of Us Part 2 has a handful of themes it's trying to convey simultaneously, and they are thus. Being a hero or villain is a matter of perspective. Killing is bad. Revenge is a hollow pursuit, an endless vicious cycle that turns good people into the real monsters. And of course, all you gamers out there who play these violent first-person shooters and what have you should really be taught a lesson. In case you somehow didn't pick up on those themes due to the script's complete lack of subtlety and jackhammer tactic of battering you over the head with its endless emotional manipulation techniques they teach in first-year creative writing, there are several filmed interviews with Neil Druckmann on YouTube telling you that this is precisely what the game is about, and it's not meant to be, and I quote, fun. In short, it's attempting to use a video game where you can kill easily hundreds of people to teach you a moral lesson that most of you learned in Sunday school or on your own by the time you were 22 at the latest. It encourages you to kill and seek revenge while simultaneously slapping you on the hand for going along with it in the first place. The first scene of the game should clue you in on the fact that something fishy is going on here. It's a replay of the operating room scene from the end of the first game, only not so subtly different. The doctor now looks far younger and not at all menacing. Gone are the deep arched eyebrows, the dark frown lines, the aged, raggedy skin. Instead of an evil mad scientist, you have this young, seemingly benevolent man behind the mask. And then, in a brief addition that wasn't in the original game, the camera focuses on Joel's face as it slowly becomes filled with righteous rage and indignation. This, boys and girls, is what we call visual retconning, done just to try and drive home the idea that maybe Joel wasn't just making a choice that almost any father would. No, maybe he was just selfish and cared more about his own inner world than the outer world it resided in. It's altering the original scene to plant a seed here in the back of your mind. Maybe Joel was really the villain all along who deserved some bad karma coming his way. We'll just pretend to be stupid and not take notice of the fact that there's no such thing as vaccines for fungus, though scientists have been toying with it for over 50 years. It's not really needed because fungal infections are one of the easiest infections to kill. Ellie would have died for nothing, so in reality, Joel made the right call. But moving on! It's 4 years later. Ellie eventually learns the truth about what happened at the hospital, so she and Joel have grown distant. The beginnings of a relationship with a girl named Dina took place at a party the night before, and Ellie is still reeling from that when she and Dina get sent on patrol. While they're out, they learn that Joel and Tommy went on patrol as well, but didn't return to their agreed meetup spot. We switch perspectives to a woman we don't know, a woman named Abby, whose friend Owen leads her to a cliff overlooking Joel and Ellie's hometown, and it is alluded to that a man they are looking for is in there. Uh-oh! About 90 minutes into the game, you're playing as Abby, and you get trapped by a swarm of infected. Suddenly, there's Joel to save the day. He and Tommy help you to temporary safety, where Tommy introduces himself and Joel to you. Abby reacts to Joel's name, but quickly recovers. She suggests a safe house nearby. Joel and Tommy are familiar with it, so they agree to follow Abby there. Once they get there, Owen and several others are there. This time, Joel gives out his name, then is surprised when everyone seems to have already heard of him. Abby then shoots him in the leg, has one of her friends put a tourniquet on to keep him from bleeding to death, and starts to slowly beat on him with a golf club. She is clearly enjoying it. Meanwhile, Ellie stumbles upon the safe house, stumbles through the basement door without clearing her corners, even though she was supposed to be trained in combat, and gets instantly pinned to the ground, where she watches helplessly as Abby bashes Joel's brains out with said golf club. This happens an hour to 90 minutes into the game, depending on how much looting and exploring you've done so far. Rather than kill Ellie, they knock her and Tommy out, and from here you are led to believe that this will be a revenge tale where you pursue Abby and her friends to take them out one by one, 70s Grindhouse Mad Max style. And it certainly seems that way, for about 10 hours. You kill a ton of people, and their dogs too. Or you throw bottles and sneak past them all, or let clickers kill them.
Fly, my pretties, fly!
You do you. But then 10 hours in, something happens. Abby finds your hideout. She kills one of your friends, who has barely gotten any screen time up to that point, so you don't give a shit, shoots Tommy in the head but somehow doesn't kill him, and then everything goes black. And suddenly, you see a younger Abby. She meets up with her father, who asks her to help free a zebra who's stuck in some barbed wire. Then you discover that her father was the younger, friendlier-looking doctor that Joel killed in the new version of the previous game's ending. You flash forward 4 years, and Abby is a soldier for the WLF, the Washington Liberation Front, and she's been vigorously training all this time in the hopes of finding Joel and killing him. She walks past the WLF version of Planet Fitness so you can see how she was able to bulk up to such massive proportions in a post-apocalyptic world. You get the feeling that while Owen agreed to help her seek revenge on Joel, as did several of her friends and her leader Isaac, they do not share her compulsive drive to train, which she mentions several times. Gotta get to training. We're gonna be late for training. They really go out of their way to hammer in how she got so bulked and how obsessed she is. Abby is then led down a side story that has very little to do with the rest of the game, other than the fact that the writers are clearly trying to accomplish two goals. One, they want you to see that Abby isn't really a villain. She sees her and her family as the victims from her perspective, just as Ellie does. She's just a normal human being trying to survive and find some justice in this crazy mixed up world, just like Ellie is. And the second goal is to make you equate Abby with both Ellie and Joel. Abby lost someone, just like Joel. Abby has become hard, embittered, and distrusting, just like Joel. But Abby has friends, just like Ellie. Abby is in a love triangle with her desired lover and her ex, just like Ellie. Only with Abby, the ex is pregnant, and with Ellie, the intended love interest is pregnant. In a flashback, Owen takes Abby to an aquarium. In Ellie's flashback, Joel takes her to a museum. In the early part of the game, Ellie and Dina have sex. In the section for Abby, Abby and Owen have sex. In the first game, Joel is tasked with protecting Ellie and taking her to the Firefly Hospital in hopes of a cure. In Abby's part of the second game, she happens across a young Seraphite, which is a weird cult who are at war with the WLF, named Lev, and becomes his protector and travels to an island to save him. You later find out that Lev is a transgender male who has fled from the Seraphites because they were going to marry him away as a child bride to one of the elders, and he refused and cut his hair. And he doesn't know how his mother is going to react to him now being Lev instead of who he used to be. And in the Left Behind DLC for the original game, we learned that Ellie is actually a lesbian who has a budding relationship with a young friend. Joel was protecting a lesbian. Abby is protecting a trans boy. Can you see what's really happening here? You play 10 hours as Ellie, and then Ellie's story stops, and then you replay the same story as Abby. Not just in that it's the same 4 days in Seattle, only from Abby's perspective, but that her whole side story with Lev and Owen and what have you that has no real bearing on the main plot, Ellie's plot, actually mirrors several of the exact same story beats of Ellie and Joel from both the original game and the first 10 hours of this one. You're literally replaying 4 days in Seattle and a ton of what has occurred across 2 games up till now at the same time. You're just doing it with different characters that you previously had just met, and it was to see them murder one of the core characters of the game. And yet all of this literary and emotional manipulation is meant to make you care about this character all of a sudden, when the first 10 hours as Ellie, you spent slaughtering WLF soldiers, her friends, one of whom was pregnant, and Abby's dog, which the game forces you to play fetch with twice as Abby, just to make sure you feel post-slaughter guilt for killing it earlier. Then by the time you as Abby make it to Ellie, you have a chance to kill Dina, who Ellie states is pregnant, and Abby grins and says, "Good." But then she looks at Lev and decides not to kill a pregnant woman, not because she feels horror and self-disgust like Ellie did when she killed a pregnant woman, but because she can see on Lev's face that her one remaining friend would not approve. She spares Dina and Ellie so as not to lose her last friend. Then it switches back to Ellie. She's helping to raise Dina's baby, and Tommy shows up. He's found where Abby is, and Ellie starts having PTSD flashbacks of Joel dead, and suddenly decides she's gonna bail on this new, peaceful life and relationship for the chance to kill Abby. She heads down to where Abby was last seen, has a tangle with yet another faction called the Rattlers, who you earlier see capture both Abby and Lev. She quickly dispatches the Rattlers there, breaks into their base, and frees all their hostages, who tell her that Abby and Lev have been crucified down on the beach. Ellie goes down there, sees them hanging there, has Abby right where she wants her, and then she just cuts Abby down. She lets Abby cut Lev down, who she doesn't even know. Abby leads them to a boat, and as she's stashing her stuff, Ellie sees Joel dead again, and boom, nope, now she wants to kill Abby again, and threatens to kill Lev if Abby won't fight. And so they fight. Again. During the fight, Ellie gets 2 of her fingers bitten off. She finally, at long last, has Abby at her mercy. You've made it through all that killing that the game encourages you to do, but simultaneously wants you to feel guilty about. But it'll all be worth it to finally get the revenge that 10 hours of Ellie's story and 5 to 7 hours of Abby's pointless side quest jammed onto the end of the game has conditioned you and encouraged you to both crave and simultaneously feel guilt about. And then she has another flashback of Joel sitting on the porch playing guitar, and she just lets Abby and Lev go. They ride off in the boat to look for the surviving fireflies, and Ellie goes back to her now empty farmhouse and finds that she can't even play her guitar properly anymore because of her missing fingers. She gave up her relationship, her child, and her one last remaining connection to Joel for revenge that she chose not to take at literally the last second. Holy shit, there are so many problems to dissect here. The 5 to 7 hour Abby adventure both mimics story beats from The Last of Us 1 and story beats from the first 10 hours of The Last of Us 2. It just switches the characters out. It plays completely different from the first 10 hours, aside from the same general gameplay mechanics. No more open world downtown map, now it's back to linear missions. It has big Uncharted style scripted action sequences in the back of trucks and riding on horseback through flaming villages. It has the biggest boss fight of the game against a giant multi-limbed slime ball. It feels like planned after release DLC that was instead grafted into the core game, and perhaps that's what it originally was. The game did get delayed several times after all, and if you cut the Abby part out, The Last of Us 2 would be just about as long as the original game was. Perhaps they put it in here because they hoped that it would make you empathize with Abby, so that by the time you were drowning her in the sea, you would want to let her go too. To show how revenge can turn you into a monster, but solely by your choice. The problem here is that by the time you get to the Abby part, you've already seen her murder Joel 90 minutes in and enjoy it. In fact, she brings it up several times at the beginning of her section of the game, making it obvious that, unlike Ellie, she felt no remorse whatsoever for killing him. Her only regret appears to be that it made her friends think less of her. It's all about the self there, her revenge, her father, her friends, her dog, her new friends to replace her old friends who died, one of whom she didn't even so much as mourn or mention again after Tommy blew his brains out. This is the character we're supposed to feel empathy for? This is the character you wasted 5 to 7 hours rehashing already experienced story beats to make us identify with her? This is the woman you want us to not want to kill out of guilt, when by that point we've potentially murdered hundreds of people, clickers, and dogs, abandoned our wife and baby just to get to her? Are you serious? Abby doesn't earn that reprieve. Nothing she does or says earns that for her. You could have tried putting that 5 to 7 hours at the start of the game instead to try and build empathy before getting to Joel's murder, but even then, she's just a plain unlikable character. She walks around with a perpetual furrowed brow, even on the rare occasion that she smiles about something. You can try to make her story a clone of Joel and Ellie's all you want, but it's just going to come across as a pale imitation because she's just a badly written character. There was potential there, but you squandered it, Naughty Dog. Never mind the fact that the whole plot is predicated on two glaring mistakes that shouldn't even exist. Joel was shown in the first game to be a person who distrusted strangers and looked for traps and deception under every nook and cranny. There is no way he would have just given his name out to strangers the way he did. And when Abby tracks down Ellie for their first fight, how does that happen? Because when Ellie goes to the aquarium and kills Owen, the dog, and the pregnant Mel, she is so taken aback by what she's done that she drops her map on the floor. Her friends are there. They don't stoop to pick it up for her. It has the location of their hideout circled in big blue magic marker. This is some downright lazy-ass writing. And even the ending. She can't play Joel's song with missing fingers, so she leaves the last gift he ever gave her, that guitar, leaning against an open window where the sun and rain will warp it and rot it away, making it useless for anyone else who may one day find it, and destroying her last link to Joel by her own choice. And do you know why? Because all she had to do was restring the guitar upside down and learn to play it left-handed with a pick. Jimi Hendrix, anyone? You don't find out any new information about Ellie's mother. No headway is made at all concerning the cordyceps fungus, and instead it's treated as a complete afterthought that doesn't drive jack squat in the plot. And possibly the worst part of it all is that the flashbacks between Ellie and Joel are the best part of the game. The writing actually feels like the original, unlike the rest of The Last of Us 2. But then you step back and take a look at the full picture and you realize that they're primarily put there for two reasons. to lessen the blow of Joel's murder for die-hard fans and to set up parallels between Joel and Ellie and Abby and Lev to try and manipulate you into giving a crap about a wholly unlikable character, that being Abby. Got no issues with Lev. Lev is actually an interesting character, one of my favorite new characters of the game. But Abby? Holy shit. The Last of Us Part 2 is Naughty Dog's Mass Effect 3. It's Naughty Dog's The Last Jedi. The game's conflicting themes write checks that the writers are ultimately unwilling to let Ellie cash. They want you to see that revenge can turn anyone into a cold-blooded killer, and they want you to see how you bad evil gamers shouldn't be enjoying killing people in games, but after already killing a small stadium full of people, suddenly they're not willing to let Ellie and in turn you, the player, follow down that same road to its logical conclusion, not even as an optional choice so the player has agency in how things end. You really couldn't think of anything better to do here than release a $60 finger wagging at your own audience that was probably spawned as a retort to the moral dichotomy of Nathan Drake, the justifiably beloved, lovable scoundrel and Sony mascot who kills thousands of people in every game. And not only that, but do it in such a ham-fisted and disjointed way that all your subtext and foreshadowing and mirroring and guilt-tripping and contrivances ultimately led to nothing but possibly the third game being all about Abby and Lev rejoining the Fireflies and possibly warring with the Rattlers now? In other words, your Mass Effect Andromeda? Really? The Last of Us 2 gets a 4 out of 7, and I'm being generous. Yo, wait! When does Ghost of Tsushima get here? So, how did you like this new review? You know what? Don't answer that, but feel free to leave a comment, drop me a like. Why don't you subscribe so that you can keep track of all my newest videos coming out? Be sure to follow me on Twitch. I have a weekly podcast called The Seventh Cast that takes place every weekend, every Saturday from 6 to 9 p.m. Central. Link is in the description. Feel free to follow me on Twitter. Link is in the description. And until then, folks, this is 7.